Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. We look at their lived experiences and we find out a little bit more about what it is that's helped them to gain their sense of identity and sense of belonging. And this week, I say this every week, and it's true, we've got a really special guest, and that's Hashim Ahmed. And he is a professor of urology at the Department of Cancer and Surgery at Imperial College, London. Hashim, I'm so happy that you have agreed to be a guest with us on Belonging. I'm going to start off with the usual question that I pose, which is, what was it as you were growing up which gave you your sense of belonging, your sense of identity in the early years?
Wayne, thank you for having me and inviting me to this important series of talks and interviews that you're doing with very eminent people. So I'm glad to join it. So I grew up in Birmingham. I grew up in an inner city area, fairly rough area, very multicultural, but deprived area in Birmingham. And really my identity, I guess, which gave me my sense of belonging, was the fact that I was part of a South Asian community, predominantly from a Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin. I'm originally from Bangladesh. I was born there, came here at the age of 3 when my family emigrated over, and then belonging to a very strong Muslim community. So there was a very strong cultural South Asian but Muslim flavor to that community, and I think that sort of sense of belonging to that community was quite important. We obviously grew up, myself and others, in an area which was very challenging, very in terms of poverty levels, in terms of educational expectations, educational attainment, and that was tough. That was tough, but we had to ride beyond that, or I had to. I was quite a determined young boy, I think, looking back at the time.
So it was your identity, your sense of belonging came from the community. You're the child of immigrant parents. When they came over, were they looking to give you a better life? What was it? What was their motivations, and what was their expectations of you as you were growing up in the UK?
Yeah, so I was the youngest of 4 children. Right. My father had come over before that as an initial immigrant into the UK. He worked in farms and factories. He had completed schooling up to the age of about 16, but had to then just find his way. Large family in Bangladesh, and his father sort of gave him a little bit of inheritance, but he had to just carry on. And so I think he saw his role in coming over to the UK. I think his generation, what they did was their thinking anyway, was that they would come over to the UK and work for a few years in the UK, gather a lot of money, and then go back. And they hadn't really thought about staying. I think once they came, and once my father came and my mother came, they suddenly realized that the opportunities for their children were going to be much more and much better here. Certainly through education, but also just general job and employment prospects and living in the UK compared to Bangladesh, even if you were from a middle income background in Bangladesh, as they were.
Yeah.
And so they decided to stay because they
Yeah.
needed to stay to get us through education. And,
Yeah.
to get one child through education, that's, 18 years at least, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
so they decided to stay. But I think their hope was that once they got us through education, once we got our jobs and we had settled, and that they would still go back.
Right.
And we would support them when, and it never really happened. My father passed away halfway through university. So although he saw me go to university,
Yeah.
he never really saw me complete university, and didn't really reap the benefits of any of us earning money. So he worked in a factory until, a year before he passed away, unfortunately, at the age of 55. So, but I think he had a strong sense, because he was educated up to the age of 16, and he was one of those men in the UK that helped the local community. So people used to come to him with documents and things like that to look at. And he was very, very keen that his children go through education. So my older brother did an engineering degree, went on to do a PhD. I was the first medic, I guess, in my extended family, and certainly one of the first in the community, not the first, but one of the first. And, what sacrifice did he have to make? He had to make the sacrifice that he wouldn't put his children straight into work at the age of 16, like many others did. So, and that meant him carrying on working in a difficult setting, in a factory, and working, to pay off a very, a mortgage, and, he bought a house. Again, he was earning 13,000-14,000 a year, which, even in those days was a tiny amount. And I don't know how he did it. We never felt that we were deficient in anything. And we were always encouraged to stay in school and continue and work hard, but without pressure, without huge amounts of pressure.
Yeah. So your dad kind of protected you, brought you across, gave you that stability, a stable home environment. Your father and your mother gave you a stable home environment so that you could effectively express yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are well, certainly in my family, we were just encouraged to stay in school and work hard in school. There wasn't a huge amount of pressure to follow any particular career. The career that I went into sort of naturally fitted with what I wanted to do, but they gave us that stability at home. They gave us that freedom to stay in school. They gave us that encouragement, and they sacrificed. They sacrificed their own probably well-being and their benefit, or in terms of having a little bit more than they could have if they had encouraged us to switch over to work or start a part-time job or something like that. But he always, with me, discouraged me from doing a part-time job, because he knew that would distract from my education.
I'm going to ask a quick question, because you were the baby of the family now, right?
Yeah.
Do your siblings see it in the same way, or did they say you got an easy ride by comparison?
Yeah, probably. If you ask my siblings now, they probably would say that I got an easy ride, because my older siblings did have to start working, part-time and that sort of thing. So I was given an easy ride. I think at a very early age, both my parents realized, because of feedback from the teachers, that I was very bright. And I always qualify these sort of statements about myself, that I'm not trying to be arrogant. It's just I was very bright. And they constantly got that feedback from the teachers, and realized that they needed to give me that space to flourish and achieve what I could achieve, because within the circumstances that I was, which is in the city area with poverty and diversity, with constant influx of immigrants and, challenges at school.
Yeah.
With new kids coming in, having to be just taught English,
Mm-hmm.
And I came in at the age of 3, started nursery at the age of 4.
Yeah.
And couldn't speak English at that time, and had to learn it myself. So, but there were kids coming in at the age of 7, 8. My older brother came in at the age of 9. So 8 or 9. My sister at the age of 9 or 10. So, and they had to teach those children English, and start from scratch. So, huge number of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
In those schooling environments and within those communities.
So let's just look at that schooling bit for a minute and determine. You mentioned about the fact that your parents were constantly getting feedback about your potential, that you're very bright, etc. But in the school, was that all the way through school, from primary school upwards, or was it a different split balance? Was primary school more nurturing, secondary school? How was it? How did it play out for you?
Yeah, primary school was fantastic, and my experience in secondary school was fantastic as well. But now looking back, it's quite interesting in that the expectations in primary school, I think because of individual teachers, rather than a culture at the school. The culture at the school was probably not to necessarily have, huge expectations of their children. But there were individuals, one particular teacher who really, wanted the bright kids to excel. And she encouraged, us, those of us who she felt were bright enough to go for the 11 plus. She sneakily gave us 11 plus teaching. I look back and I remember her saying, "Oh, I'm not allowed to do this. The council have said I can't, we're not allowed to give extra teaching for the 11 plus. The 11 plus is supposed to be a test of how good the kids are, not how good they are at revising for things." And so we were, but she gave us some extra lessons on the sly. But it's when you do it on the sly, when you do it at a low level, it's never going to be enough. Like, I have done for my older son, and extra tuition, extra schooling, buying those test papers, going through them, going through mock tests, so I never got through the 11 plus. But I felt, pushed. I felt like there was no limit in primary school. And when I went to secondary school, it's just a bigger institution. There was a lot more kids, a greater diversity, greater challenges. We used to have kids in the upper years who used to go around, a few kids who used to go around trying to beat up the local kids from the other schools, as some kind of challenge. That's the sort of thing that was going on. And there was one day when I was within a few days of me starting secondary school, there was a mass of kids at our gates, basically because all the other schools decided to come together and come and beat up the older kids in our school. And so the local police station had brought out, their mounted police and all the police officers, and the school teachers rushed to the gates to lock the gates so that they couldn't get in. So that's what happened in secondary school. But we were, I was quite a determined child. I was very motivated, self-motivated. I didn't need huge amount of encouragement. I was very competitive. I knew that I could achieve, and I just drove myself to do that beyond any expectations that the school might have had. So the general expectation in the school was low for most of those kids, but I think again there were individual teachers that recognized the potential and the and encouraged. But I think even if that wasn't the case, I was still the sort of kid I was back then, you know, really, really driven and single-minded, that I would have, you know, got through that.
Where do you think that drive came from? Have you got any idea? Was there anything? When was, because to have that drive to remove yourself from that kind of distraction, and when you're placed in an environment where it's may well feel easier to conform to what everybody else is doing and their expectations, where do you think that motivation for you came from? Have you got any ideas?
It's, I don't know. You know, it wasn't motivated by trying to get myself out of that community. It wasn't motivated by a desire to get myself out of poverty, because I never really felt any issues on that front. We were, but I never felt it. It's odd, because I think, looking back, I think it was just purely in myself. And it sounds odd, I know, but I just wanted to do really well. And it was competitive as well. Again, without being arrogant, you know, I wanted to be the best. And I wanted to always come top in every single test that I did. And that competition, which again, in a comprehensive school, in a socialist system, is discouraged. You're discouraged to, you know, be competitive. You're just, you know, everybody, but I had that just inherently inside me. I wanted to be the best all the time.
Can I ask, this is going slightly off track, because I'm going back to this idea about you being the youngest child. Were you competitive with your older siblings?
No.
No?
No.
Oh.
No.
Now that blew my theory out of the water.
No, no, I wasn't. So no, at home I wasn't. No, because they were much older. You know, they were a few years older than me, so we weren't clustered around the same. You know, there weren't sort of year differences between us. So I was truly the youngest, and there was no sort of sibling rivalry or sibling issues of competitiveness on that front. No, it was, you know, it sounds bizarre. You know, you look for something external that drives you, but actually with me, it was just purely all inside. I was just so self-driven. And anybody who knows me now probably will hear me and think, okay, that's where it comes from. But it's just you know, maybe a bit mad, but no, I was just totally self-driven, hugely competitive. You know, I used to, and I still have that book. I used to have an exercise book where I wrote down every single grade that I got in secondary school and every single test result. I found it the other day, and my wife just started laughing and showing it to my kids, who thought it was just, I have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old boy, and they found it very sad. That's the sort of kid I was.
You knew, you had this inner peace within yourself. You knew what you wanted to do, which would hold you in good stead going forward. So you've also mentioned about the fact that the school kind of like was not, I'm not going to say crowd control, but at points it was crowd control, not necessarily having high expectations. Doing GCSEs, doing the A levels, when did you get this aspiration that you wanted to become a doctor? And what role models did you have around you that may have, or anyone who had inspired you to say, well, you can go to this place or you can go to that place? Did you have those individuals who were pushing you in that sense?
I guess the advantage that I had was because all of my motivation came internally. I didn't need role models, and I appreciate a lot of kids do, and a lot of people do. And as I've gone through my career now, I have used role models to sort of boost myself and boost my self-motivation. But at that time, I didn't really. I mean, you know, I was watching Casualty on TV, and maybe that motivated me. I don't know. I quite enjoyed that series and the heroism. So maybe that did influence me. But I didn't need it. It was, I just, at the age of 13, I said, well, actually, I quite like to be a doctor. And so I went to the library, read those big books on how you get into university and what you need. And I sort of worked back from there. And I said, well, you know, I might quite like to go to Oxford or Cambridge. So what do I need? So I worked backward from there. Okay, I need to do 4 A levels. I need to get, you know, A's in those. And so to do 4 A levels, what do I need to do? I need to get probably straight A's in GCSEs, and these are the sort of subjects I need to do. So I just became driven from that point, and became really single-minded. I remember having a meeting with a careers officer who was external to the school. Those career officers used to go around lots of schools, and they sort of heard this thing from me at the age of 14, and they said, okay, well, that's all very nice and good, but you know, you got to remember, a lot of kids from this school and from the society you're coming from don't really get into medicine. And he handed me a pamphlet on how to be a food technician. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a food technician, but it just sort of gave you an idea of the sort of expectations, the differential expectations, rather than encouraging me. I'm not sure he even gave me a pamphlet on medicine. He just gave me a pamphlet on food, being a food technician. So it's fine giving options, because I think everybody needs to have options just in case your original idea doesn't work out. But to sort of slap the ambition down almost, was quite revealing. And again, being the single-minded person I was, I didn't care what he said, so I just cracked on and remained focused on what I wanted to do. And you know, again, another story in secondary school, about early in the second year of GCSEs, for some reason, I think we had seen a syllabus on one of the teachers' desks, a physics syllabus, 2 or 3 of us. And we sort of flicked through it and realized that we hadn't covered about 3/4 of the syllabus. And it was already about 3 months into the second year of GCSE. So we were literally only about 8 or 9 months away from the exams. And so we looked at the syllabus and we thought, oh my God, we haven't covered 3/4. So even if we get 90–95% in the 1 quarter, we would still potentially fail the exam, or at best get an E or a D. And so we then got the syllabi for all of the subjects that had exams, and we had a lot of coursework subjects in those days. And some of the teachers were quite reluctant to give us those syllabus, but we just forced it off them, or we got the exam board that we were doing and went to the library and got the syllabus for that exam board. In those days, you had to go physically to a library; you couldn't just find it on the internet, and that required us, you know, going by bus into the central library. The local library didn't have any of this, you know, going into one of their reference sections on the 5th floor or somewhere and digging out this dusty book. And the realization that across the board, we had not covered over half of the syllabus for each of those subjects was shocking to the core. And we then had to teach ourselves. You know, there was about 3 or 4 of us in this group. And we ended up, you know, just getting textbooks, mainly from the libraries again. You know, I think some of us bought some books and we shared. You know, we couldn't really afford lots of textbooks. So we had to go to the library and you know, get books from there and cover the syllabus page by page. And some of the syllabuses were actually detailed enough that you could just learn the topic from the syllabus. Effectively revision notes. And that's what we did. And if we didn't do that, I would have failed. I think we would have failed actually my GCSEs. And in the end, I got, you know, 10 GCSEs straight A's. But that was the difference, you know, because they were so distracted with the challenges of teaching a breadth of kids, most of whom were not motivated, or they felt that they, weren't motivated, and their attention was distracted to them and not helping the top
stretching,
kids,
giving
and
challenge to those who
were
more able, as it were.
Yeah.
So you've got fantastic. Clearly, you've learned the skill from an early age of, one, relying on your inner strength, and two, being able to actually identify a problem and find solutions around that problem. In which case, for example, the illustration you gave about the syllabus and not having covered half of the content. So going then on into A levels, and then deciding on where to go for your degree, and to counter that, did you stay at the same school? Did you go to a different college?
No, so I moved. There were no sixth form. There was no sixth form at the school, so we had to all move. And so I went to a further education college called Cadburys in Birmingham, and that was a bit more settled. Actually, they had high expectations from their kids. They picked the sort of brighter kids to go there because they could. So it was my sort of first experience, not a fully selective, but of a selective, semi-selective type institution. So surrounded by much more motivated kids, high expectations from the teachers. And it was 2 years, so it was very enjoyable. Did a lot of extracurricular stuff as well. And the head teacher and the biology teacher had been to Oxford, and encouraged me to apply. I think I wanted to apply anyway, but they gave me pointers in applying to medical school generally, but also in applying to Oxford. And I think if I didn't have those pointers, I would not have been able to navigate the Oxford application system. It's still quite convoluted and quite difficult to get through, and you do really need mentoring and guidance to get through that system. As you may know, you have to apply to university, but also apply to individual colleges, and individual colleges can be very different as to what sort of kids they take. It's a very strange system, and then you have to apply much earlier and be interviewed. So, and the interviews are very rigorous. I spent two nights, 3 days in a cold December or November winter's period, living in one of the colleges and being interviewed, I think in the end 6 or 7 times. And so that was tough. I'm not sure I wanted to go to Oxford after that, because they kept on summoning me to have another interview. And in the end, I think by the penultimate and last one, I was just so fed up. I think I was just so relaxed. And finally my true self came out when I was,
they wore you down.
They wore me down to my bare bones. And but it was tough. It was tough. They were asking proper exam type questions. This isn't the sort of chat we're having now about, tell us about yourself and tell us why you want to do medicine. This was like, here's a video on immunology, and then 5 minutes later they would start asking you questions about that video on immunology. What do B cells do? What does that T helper cell do? How does it interact with the lymph nodes and antigens? And it was just full on. We'd never done anything like that before. We'd never seen anything like that before. And I remember one interview where I just said, look, I don't know. And she said, well, what about this? And I said, I don't know. And then I actually stopped the interview and I said, if you carry on asking me these sort of questions, I will just keep on saying I don't know, because I literally don't know. So you can carry on asking me, but I think it would be better if you just ask me something else. And the look of horror and shock on her face. This was the penultimate one. And then I went to another interview after that at another college, and I think I was by then thinking, well, I'm not going to get in, so I'll just relax now.
Yeah.
And I actually enjoyed that interview.
Yeah.
I was one of the questions they had asked me was, here's a feather. So they took out a feather and put it on the table and said, you're an alien that has just landed on Earth, and this is the first thing you see. Tell us what's going through your mind. So yeah, for a 17-year-old, that sort of question, it was quite interesting. But
so it sounds you got into Oxford after that experience. You got the A-level grades,
and I accepted. Yeah,
and you accepted the offer, even though they ground
Sheffield
you down.
also gave me an offer. You know, I look back and sometimes I think maybe Sheffield would have been a nice place.
So taking into consideration your background, what was the experience from your family perspective of you, one, getting into medicine, two, getting into Oxford to do medicine, and how did that make you feel within yourself, within the community, and your sense of who you were, your sense of belonging?
Yeah, so I mean, they were really proud, obviously. Firstly, medicine, one of the first people to get into medicine, but also then to get into Oxford. And it's one of those names, isn't it? Oxford and Cambridge, that sort of cuts across all cultures, all societies, and all levels of deprivation and poverty. You could go over to Bangladesh and ask somebody working on the fields, and they'll know you know, what Oxford is. So immense sense of pride. You know, I could see it every time my parents visited, and the whole society. You know, in Birmingham, you know, I was one of their own, and I had achieved something, you know, that a lot of them would not have been able to. So they took all of them. I think everybody felt very proud of that moment and proud of what I have achieved, and they continue to do so, which is great. That community support is, you know, now you go through phases in your life, don't you, where you are very attached to your community, and then when you go to university, you want to spread your wings. You become a little bit more detached from that community you grew up in, just like you start to become detached from parents. It's part of growing up. But now, you know, in my later years, you know, you start to have that affinity to the culture and the community and the religion. You know, I go back to Bangladesh quite regularly. At least I did before pre-pandemic, because I feel that tug on the umbilical cord. You know, and some people say, well, you came here at the age of 3, so you know, you don't have that much, and you know, you're essentially brought up here, which is true, but that's that strong sense of belonging to that local community, to the, you know, what do we call ourselves? British, Bengali, Muslim, you know, we you know, I don't think any of those take priority over the others. All part of what I am. And you increasingly feel that affinity to that. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just wary of time, and I do want to bring some questions in, but we've got so much to cover. So there's a couple of things which I wanted to ask you about, which was related to just finishing off your university career, even though we've only just about to start it. What was it like then for when you got into the university and were actually at Oxford University? What was that experience for you, academically, socially? How did that impact you? And did you feel pressure, considering the pride which your family had in you? Did you feel an extra burden of pressure to belong?
Yeah, so there's two or three aspects, I guess, to that. Firstly, the change. So, you know, all of us who go to university, if we leave home, you suddenly have that base taken away from you. But you got to remember, my base is a community where if we walked past a pub, we would literally cross the road, because we did not want the fumes from that pub to get into our clothes or get into, you know, to breathe it in. That's, you know, the strong sense of religion. to going to a university, or any university, I guess, where the kids suddenly have their freedom and they are drinking till their cows come home. And, that was really, really tough for me. That first few months of just seeing alcohol all over the place, in the halls of residence, in the colleges, caked all over the corridors and the floors, and just you didn't know where to step, you didn't know where to go, because everywhere you went, you felt like you were betraying your community, your identity, because I had a strong sense of religion, and I wanted to maintain that, and a lot of people who went as maybe didn't. And there weren't many Muslims there. There weren't many Asians there. There weren't many people from a inner city background, comprehensive background. In those days, even those who came from the public or the state system, as they called it here, were from grammar schools. So, very rarefied schooling. And the majority were from private education. Very, very difficult that first year. You learn to adapt. You learn to quickly adapt and find, communities that you can latch onto, if you like, to give you that sense of belonging again. So that was one aspect. That was tough, but got on with it. The second aspect was academic, and that's tough. That I think happens in all universities, but particularly in Oxford, where everybody has come from a school where they were top, not second or third, usually top. And you put all of those people together, and not everybody can be top.
That's right. Yeah.
You just literally cannot. And so I was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And that felt really strange. It was very, very difficult for the first 2 years. And it was difficult for a lot of people. Some people in the bottom 10 or bottom 20, in inverted commas, it's even more difficult for them.
Yeah.
And some people just carried on trying to be top, and they just couldn't, no matter how hard you tried. You just couldn't. There was just some kids who just were so much brighter than you, or had, I don't know, photographic memory or something. I don't know. But you just couldn't. You couldn't break that ceiling that you were in, because everybody else was just constantly trying hard as well. And that could break you. So you needed to adapt very quickly, accept where you were academically, and just get on and enjoy the rest of university, which had huge amounts of opportunities. And that's what I did. It's only once you leave Oxford that you then maybe start to realize, actually, you're not that bad. You go back to society, and you can be in the top 5% or whatever. Again, without being arrogant, you just
But that there's something which you said about it could break you. It could break your spirit. It could break your sense of identity. Was part of your identity, would you say, tied up with your academic ability?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I was known as the, one of the brightest from our community. So, and you felt, I think you asked me, did I feel pressure? I felt internal pressure, and nobody, nobody knew that I wasn't top anymore. They were just proud that I was in Oxford. But I felt internal pressure that I may be, letting people down, that I'm no longer near the top or at the top. But again, realizing very, very quickly that it was a fool's game in Oxford to try and be top when it was very clear that you couldn't. You just had to accept whatever place you were. And then and enjoy it.
And continue to do your best. So instead of necessarily wanting to be the best, potentially do your best to be the best that you could be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I'm going to just ask, we are really out of time. I don't know if anyone has got questions. If you want to put your hand up, I'm still interrogating. Sorry, guys, I'm taking a bit longer this week, but it's because you're just so interesting. There's just so many things which I want to ask you. When you then started to kind of like go off and do medicine itself, you're now a professor of urology. What was it about urology, of all of the specialties, which you decided was the specialty for you? Was there any key event which led you down the road to say, you know, this is something which I want to investigate more, etc.?
So during medical school, I went from wanting to go to Africa or India and help people, you know, with public health, and then becoming a public health physician. And a lot of what I do now may be related to public health because I'm quite interested in sort of mass screening for prostate cancer. You know, making an impact on a wide front. I think what motivated me during medical school, but you soon realize that actually you need to start to get focused a bit more. I toyed with, and eventually I knew that a surgical specialty was going to be the direction that I wanted to go in. I was pretty good with my hands, but you know, intellectually, I felt that I was there as well. So, and then you just toy with lots of different specialties, and you do look at people above you, consultants, and see whether they're enjoying the specialties that they're in. So you know, we toy with things like general surgery, vascular surgery, and you know, even now, I think my colleagues in general surgery would probably agree. You know, they certainly when I was training, they didn't look happy, and the people who looked happy were the urologists, and I think it's related. There's lots of facets to this, but it's related to the different types of things you can do, but also I think as you grow up, you realize that there's more to life and you need a social balance. You need to give time to family. You can't constantly be in the hospital. And urology had a balance of technology, had a balance of, you know, requiring a lot of medical input, so intellectual input into conditions, as well as the act of surgery and doing things with your hand, but had a good work-life balance. There weren't that many emergencies. You weren't constantly called in. And so I think slowly I went in that direction.
Did you have any mentors? Did you have anyone who kind of like similar to when you said that you had individuals who had previously gone to Oxford who gave you advice? Was there anyone who kind of like took you under their wing or mentored you to say, well, actually, we think that you could go on to become a professor, or you could do really quite well in this specialty? Did you have those experiences?
So in terms of going into the specialty, Robert Morgan was a very senior consultant at the Royal Free. He sort of took me under his wings, and then at the same time, Amir Kazari, a fantastic man. Both of them were fantastic, but Amir Kazari particularly was a real fantastic mentor to me. Took me under his wings, protected me, gave me advice, gave me nudges, gave me direction in terms of urology. And they both helped me get into urology. And then in terms of an academic career, Mark Emberton, who's now the Dean of UCL, provided that academic impetus in my career. Really sort of very bright, enthusiastic man, and infectious enthusiasm, infectious, you know, ideas in terms of doing things in research. And you know, I spent 10 years and we still collaborate together. He's still active, but yeah, so there are lots of individuals who help you during your career in a surgical specialty. See, there's a question from Diran. Hi, Diran.
Diran, do you want to ask your question? Or they might Right. Oh,
Ah, hi. Can you hear me, Hash?
yes, we can hear you, Darren.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very
We're
well.
fine.
This has been fascinating, and it's great to see you again. It's been a while. We sort of glanced off each other a little bit at UCL while I was in the administration there. I was just curious about the mentoring point. Who you found, to be, a good ally when you were working your way through what's a complex space.
Yeah, so as well as those three individuals that I've mentioned, there have been fantastic people in engineering. David Hawkes, Dean Barrett at UCL, Shonit Panwani, a radiologist, Alex Freeman, a pathologist. All of them in their own way. Manitaria, another urologist at UCL. They all provided that sort of additional cushion of support that I needed to get to where I was. So, whilst my school days was very much self-driven, and that still is the case, and that continues to be the case, after university as well. I think once I got into a medical career, I really did need others to provide that support, that nourishment, that nurturing, that mentoring. In their own little ways. So there wasn't one individual who I could look back and say, this person made my career. But I fed off all of those people because they were so fantastic in doing that. And there are lots of individuals, who I can't mention all individually because there's so many of them, but they all help. And anybody who's got to the stage where I have, every teaching moment, every PhD student, every MSc student that you've interacted with, yourself, it's just everybody helps. So I always say to people who I work with, juniors, people coming through, be kind. It sounds glib, but actually, really, if you can just be kind for even a moment, for a day, you just don't know how that person's life will transform as a result of that kindness. But then the second piece of advice is, nobody's going to do it for you, and you have to go for it. You have to really enthuse yourself and be self-motivated. People will help, but maybe don't be as mad as I am, because I was so driven and single-mindedly focused. But I think there's a lesson for all of us in there.
No, absolutely. You definitely made an impact for me and for other colleagues. So thank you.
I'm glad.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Darren. It's interesting, as you were speaking, it kind of like brought me in mind to the idea of being raised by a community, so that your community was very important to you when you were going through education, and then the community which you spoke about, the radiologists, the pathologists, who it was an academic professional community which you were then drawing upon to be able to fulfill your potential. So they were again nurturing you and helping you to get, but in a different way to them.
Absolutely. And another community in Imperial now, that community was UCL, and I still keep in touch with them, but another community in Imperial. And I could, list the George Hannahs, the David Harutas, Matt Winklers, Taylor Shahs, Norma Gibbons. There's a whole list of people at Imperial who now are part of my, core community, and I feed off them, and I hope they, appreciate that.
Yeah. There's so much which I want to unpack and investigate, but we're out of time. I think I'm gonna have to get a second follow-up with you, because there's so much which I still want to uncover. But I'm gonna ask this question. Normally I ask, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? But I've tried this one. I'm gonna try it again. I'm gonna ask the question slightly different, to ask, looking back at your career now, as a 7-year-old, 10-year-old, what would you say would have been the wow factor from your career that they may have said, wow, imagine I can do that?
I think the wow factor was going to Oxford.
Okay.
That was the wow factor. And it's still the wow factor. It's quite interesting. I go to Bangladesh, I go to the US, I go to European countries, and people will be sort of talking about which universities they qualified from. And, you know, I'll sort of mutter Oxford. And it's an immediate sort of, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, so it was a, you know, and it shouldn't be, you know, no one institution should have that much, but it just is. It's just embedded in people's psyche, isn't it? So, so that was, you know, if I had to put something, yes, that would be the one thing for that 7-year-old, you know, that really did turn my career. We didn't delve into some of the issues that happened at university, which also molded my life, which were sort of negatives at university, but maybe on another day.
Did you want to touch on any of it?
Well, just to say, you know, everybody might look back at my career and think, you know, how wonderful and successful it was, but you know, I failed my medical finals. So in the 6th year of medicine at Oxford, I failed, and I was given one more chance. 3 months later, we were one of 3 people who had failed Oxford finals for the first time, I think we were told, in 10 or 20 years. So nobody had failed medical school finals in Oxford until our year. And, you know, there may be lots of reasons as to why it happened. And that was defining. That was a horrible, scarring period of my life. You know, if you think about what I said about my school days and growing up days, that single-minded kid, to suddenly find that after 6 years of being in medicine, after, you know, 21 years, 22 years of working really hard during your life, to find that your dream would unravel. That was a horrible period, and anybody who knows me for the last 10 or 15 years might now start to understand a little bit as to what motivates me, because that scar stays with you for a long time, and it continues to define how I live my career and my life. You know, I've had other failures, but it really was a horrible period. Horrible 3-4 months.
I should have gone. We should, guys, just humor me for another 5 minutes, because I need to unpack this. Have you got 5 more minutes? We've got Dr. SP. Dr. SP, jump in with your question, and then I'm going to come back in.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Sunday. Thank you very much. This is interestingly amazing. I mean, everything you've touched on today is what we're trying to say to our students, especially a BME student, that when you come to places like Imperial, from your school, you're the top of your league, and then you're now in the middle of all top class students. You need to identify, you need to find your position. You can't say, oh, because I'm top of my class now, I need to be top of these, and you put yourself under so much pressure. And for you to also share your story of failing with us, we say to students, fail is the first, you know, attempt in learning. When you fail once, you get up again and go. Our students, sometimes they fail, they just lose everything. So your story is so amazing. Green, once this is finished, I want to have the video of this. There's a lot of students I have to share this with. So I don't have any question, but thank you very much. We need to invite you back to inspire a lot of students, especially next month, Black History Month. We have quite a few events. We need to get you to come maybe for 5-10 minutes, just talk to them. It will be really, really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sunday. Thanks, Sunday. I was just going to unpack it, because just very quickly, because that element of failure, which was said, right? And Sunday says it quite nicely, first attempt in learning, right? But at the time, it doesn't feel like it's a learning, it's a lesson. But
gosh, your world was crashing around you.
Yeah.
It was, you know, crying every day at night before you go to sleep, you know. So it's difficult. It still affects me now, as you can see. Because it was a difficult period. So but you do learn from it. You do lift yourself, and you don't say never again, but you use that as a real motivating factor. And you remember it, and you allow it to affect you. I don't bury it. You've seen that now. You know, I'll let my emotions come through, because it is important to you know, it's part of what I am. It's part of where I am. And if I didn't have that, now looking back, I probably wouldn't be where I was. I would be maybe a consultant somewhere and a successful doctor, but I may not have been professor of urology at Imperial. May not be professor, you know. So it was it was a springboard, but not the one that I would have necessarily chosen for it to be a springboard for my career. But I used it, and I still use it. And
you know what? I'm gonna change it round, because I'm gonna change around what Sunday had said, because Sunday had said first attempt in learning, fail, right? I also think that it was probably a valuable lesson which you needed to learn, a valuable lesson which was going to help you to fulfill your potential, because sometimes when we think that everything's gone swimmingly, there's nothing that we need to learn. And so it's something which helped you to, I don't know, but something.
No, you're right. No, you're right. And you know, you could look back at, you know, at all of those years leading up to that point and say, well, maybe there was a bit of arrogance. Maybe that was the fall, you know, the fall that was required to check and balance who I was in my life. And you know, I'm, as you know, I'm a religious man, and you know, these things happen for a reason. And even if you're not religious, for those who aren't listening to this, you know, there's sometimes life brings balance, and that's the balance I probably needed.
Hashim, it's I could quite literally just sit and talk with you for hours, but our time is up on this occasion. But as Sunday says, we need to invite, and we need to come together as a community here at Imperial to help others to actually go further and faster. So I'm going to just say a really big thank you for sharing your time, sharing your experience with us. And it is a valuable experience that we have heard today. You know, it's absolutely brilliant. So much thanks to you. All right.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you everyone for joining in the conversation, and those who are going to look at the video afterwards. Thank you.
I'm going to just share with everybody who's our guest for next week. Our guest is going to be Eric Sterling, and he is the CEO of Sterling Academy Youth, and he's also a postgraduate study in racial equity law and community leadership at SOAS University. So he's going to be the guest with us next week. And if you haven't seen any of the other videos, then please turn to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and you'll be able to see those other videos which we have. And then in addition to that, there are our 100 guests which we've celebrated, some of the highlights, some of the conversations that we've been able to have. Please have a look at that as well, written by Nikita Ruth, one of our former guests. But what I'd like to say is just another really big thank you for joining us and being part of this Belonging family. And I hope that everyone gets gets value from hearing the stories, hearing the experiences that so many people are willing to share. So until next week, take care, and I hope to see you again next week. So thanks very much.